In three,
Claro. Sí.
2, 1. Good afternoon, people. Or hello, everyone. We want to
Eric,
welcome you to.
Eric, it's actually morning, but it's okay.
Uh, we want to welcome everyone to first episode of Imperium Thoughts from Command. Um, First, let us introduce ourselves. My name's Eric Pettaway. I've been a member of the Boston Fire Department 36 years. The last 22 as a district chief. I began as a firefighter and lieutenant in Fort Hill Square downtown, which they now call the Big House, but I will never call it the Big House. It's always Fort Hill Square to me. As a captain, I was assigned Engine 22, where I helped the company achieve designation as an advanced hazmat company, where we had Mass State Hazmat Tech, DOG, WMD Tech, and instructor. When I first promoted, I spent 2 years as the assistant fire marshal. I wasn't a fan of the place, but once I got out of my feelings, I learned a lot. In 2008, I transferred to District 7, Dorchester, Roxbury, and a slither of the South End. I've been assigned there for the last 17 years in three decker land, and I hold a BA in History, American Concentration.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I'm Dan Sheridan. I'm a battalion chief with the New York City Fire Department, and actually, I'm on my leaves right now. I'm actually retiring in October after 39 years. I started with the FDNY in 1986. I was a firefighter for 9 years. Yeah, I started out in 17 truck in the South Bronx. We were a towel ladder, and we had a very diverse area. I've spent most of my career in the Bronx, if anyone's familiar with it, very, very close to Yankee Stadium. So I did 5 years in the truck, and we dealt with, at the time, unfortunately, a lot of vacant buildings, a lot of tenements, a lot of brownstones, some row frames, lots of project buildings, a lot of high-rise fireproof multiple dwellings, some commercial. And then in 1991, they closed an engine company, our engine company next door, Engine 41, and they turned them into a squad. And then I wound up going into the squad in 1991. Spent 4 years in the squad, and we covered basically most of the South Bronx and all of Harlem and some of the Washington Heights. And I got promoted to lieutenant in 1995. I spent a little time in special operations, and then I wound up getting a spot in Engine 58 in Harlem. I did a few years there, and then I got promoted to captain in 2003. And I spent my time as a captain in Engine 46, the Cross Bronx. In 2008, I got promoted to battalion chief, and I wound up in the 6th Division. I wound up where my present location for the last 16, or I guess 16, 17 years. So my experience has basically been the Bronx, lots of tenement buildings, lots of fireproof multiple dwellings, high rise, tenements, some row frames, and taxpayers and everything else in between. So that's my experience. Yeah.
So, yes, one thing we hope to do with this venture is to really get new battalion chiefs, district chiefs, or whatever your title is, to give you thoughts on how to be a command level officer, a chief level officer when operating on the fire ground, other various emergencies. And we hope to, between our experience and our knowledge, impart upon the audience something each week that they can take away and put it into their wheelhouse and their toolbox.
Yeah. So so Eric, like you said, this is our first episode. We've had about 5 years together. We were on Fire Engineering's. We had a podcast called The First New Battalion Chief, but we decided now that YouTube is a better vehicle these days for firefighters and students to get knowledge. And I think we're just going to carry on the discussions we had on the podcast, But I think what I'd like to cover, we'll start at the ground floor, first step, and I think we'll spend quite some time. There's 13 points in a size up. I think we'll take them apart piece by piece. We use an acronym, COLE was wealth. So I think we'll start with the construction, and we'll try to use some of our own experiences that relate to the size up, for the student, for the new chiefs, for even the older chiefs, for anyone that really just wants to get a different perspective on things.
Yes, I learned under we called it S sleeves OCD. Pretty much the same thing as Cole was wealth. Um, Although I would say over time, most of those I have combined into the instead of individual steps, I consider them the same sort of size up, sufficient help. Obviously, that's they go together. I've read a lot on Culver's Wealth. I had it written down somewhere. Um, and I hope we can impress upon the audience that, nothing's set in stone, but it's good to have a good foundation. Because when you turn the corner and it's that time, you got to be ready.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you, Eric. I think the coal was wealth. I find now that out of those 13 points, the only thing that really is missing out of those 13 points is the L, is the location of the fire. But the other stuff that happens, the construction and the occupancy and all those things, you really do that instantaneously when you get the receipt of the ticket. Once you have that ticket in your hand and you're looking at it, you do this within 30 seconds. And I want to impress upon a lot of the newer chiefs and even the older chiefs that you know a lot more than you think you know. I was in my area for the better part of 39 years, and I could take an address anywhere in the South Bronx and give me an address, and I get a picture in my mind of what the building looks like. And I think that's most of the battle is information. So using that acronym, I think what will happen once students start practicing this Cole was wealth, it'll just become second nature.
Yes. And I'm a firm believer too, is don't wait to the first pitch. Like anything, you should be training. And it's not just mechanical, hands-on training, but you also have to do mental training, preparation. One of the things, and you just said it, I'm known to drive around a lot and I preach know your district a lot. I So generally when I hear the box come in and I think of the street right away, I think, okay, what's the average building on there? And does it have a building that stands out? Like where I'm at now, we could have a street where it's all three deckers, but halfway down the block is an old one-story commercial, usually ordinary construction, but you never know nowadays. We also have an abundance of facilities now that have been converted to where people are shipping products abroad. Um, and by that I mean just like food, water, those type of basic stuff they're shipping. And those are businesses seem to be popping up in old taxpayers, garages and backyards. So usually when something comes in right away, I try to think what's on that street and what stands out. Um, and I'm a big fan of know your district, know your battalion, and, and you should be on the road a lot, is what I'm saying. I had a captain that used to say, "Give me to this time, and then the rest of the day is yours." And I'm a
Yeah.
firm believer of that. Now, Dan, I want to see if I can share this for a quick second because this is something We won't get into it this time, but I believe this is something we can talk about in the future. Um, Let me see if I can do this. So now this is something I read in Brannigan's book the last time I went through it.
Mhm.
Although I don't know why it's called Brannigan anymore, but I saw in Europe, Northern Europe, this trend for cross-laminate timber
Mm-hmm.
um, being basically wood high-rises.
Yeah,
So
I've seen
now,
that.
I'm in general, a lower socioeconomic neighborhood, and I just found out they're planning on building a seven-story, basically a high-rise of this cross-laminated timber. And that
Mm-hmm.
kind of goes back to um, knowing your district. And this is something that if you're not out and about, you might turn around and wham, you just see this high-rise building that's made out of laminated timber.
Yeah. I have a really good story for that. And I think that you brought up a good point. I think what we're going to do as we move on over the weeks in the oncoming months, like I have a story about that. Like, a lower social economic area where there was a lot of rehabilitated buildings, and you talk about my land. So, but we'll save that for another day. But one thing I wanted to talk about real quick, just while we're talking about size up and the importance of size up, and before we get into the weeds on the size up, is that, like, I don't do exactly what you do. I don't drive around the neighborhood because I basically know the neighborhood. I mean, and when I'm out with the car and I'm doing my rounds, I usually focus in on new things or old things or things that are changing. But one thing I do, and I would advise, if some of the chiefs, on your commute in the morning or at night or whenever you come in for the afternoon for the night tour or whatever, what I like to do is, on that drive down, is I take a building, like, one of our biggest challenges in the FDNY are 6-story H type buildings, right? They're these massive buildings, 200 by 200. Sometimes they're set up in 2 or 3 wings. They may or may not have firewalls in the cock loft, And the cock loft is that space between the top floor, between the roof and the top floor, right? We have this 2 to 3 foot lumberyard, really. And once the fire gets into that cock loft, it's usually game over. So what I do is, I think of different buildings in my district. Like we had this one building, 500 Southern Boulevard, for instance. And I just try to imagine if we had a fire on the top floor, like what I would do. And I play these things over in my head. Where am I putting the towel ladders? What am I doing about a satellite system, water supply? And I would encourage chiefs, on their drive in, if it's a short one, a long one, or even when they're in the firehouse, is just pick a building and just imagine it was on fire in wherever, the top floor, or even if it's a lower floor, and just in your mind, just like rehearse it. Just like, what would I do? Where would I put my first line? Where would I put my first truck? What are my
Mhm.
what are my needs? What are my special needs? Are there any hazards? Is there any lightweight? Is there any window bars? Whatever it is, and just play it out. It's really important because muscle memory, and this ties in perfectly with Cole as well. There's a story about a guy. He was in the Hanoi Hilton in Vietnam, and he was a big golfer, avid golfer, and he spent 2 or 3 years in the jail in Vietnam. And every day in his mind, he played his favorite golf course in his mind, every stroke, every hole. And when he got out and he played for the first time in whatever 3 or 4 years, he didn't miss a stroke because in his mind he had already played it out. So I think what chiefs need to do, and officers or anyone in command, is just look at that building in your district or any buildings that give you any kind of worry, and just play it out in your mind.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's like what's that? Visualization, visualize. And I noticed um, you you should have a fairly good knowledge of your area. Um, and sorry, um, one thing I really we have They're much smaller than the average New York tenement, but they're similar.
Hmm.
Here in my district, they're usually no more than 5 stories, and there's not as many as you would imagine. I'd say like Brighton has a lot more. But I'm always, when driving by a certain one, I always look at it because I would say it was similar to something in your district, just a few stories smaller. And constant, you always see moving vans there, and people constantly moving in and out, constantly renovated. They seem to get renovated once a decade for
Yeah.
whatever reason. So I can imagine that the void spaces are getting bigger and bigger and messier. Today's day, I use an example. I had a church fire in an old movie theater.
Hmm.
Um, but what really struck me is the cell phone antennas that they put on top of the church to look like brick walls. And
Hmm.
on the roof of this church was a room, I would say 10 by 20, just filled with batteries.
Hmm.
And it's not something I would initially think of. And uh, so I took some pictures. I use my phone mostly, but I used to carry a digital camera, a small one.
Hmm.
Because even though it's no longer a church and it's been sitting there for 10 years while there's litigation involved, but those cell towers are still there. And I try to impress upon the members, if you go to that roof, you have to be aware of all the cables and the fact that there is a good 40 batteries in this room.
Yeah.
Um, so that kind of goes back to like knowing what's in your area. And that building, like I said, because it's in litigation, anytime I see a building in litigation or the city is going after them or there's some internal dispute, I keep an eye on that place. And I think that's something everyone should do, because that's usually when the mice with matches come about.
Mm. You and I don't want to start getting into the weeds now, but you brought up something about old movie theaters, and we're going to we'll do a whole episode on rehab buildings
Cool.
because I have some stories about rehabs and especially movie theaters. So, yeah, so let's not get into the weed now, but
Yeah.
I'm writing a note down, and we will talk about it one episode because
Yeah.
every area in the United States now is evolving. A lot of cities now that used to be just towns are seeing themselves with the old movie theaters becoming drugstores and whatever. So there's a lot to talk about with that. So I think what the takeaway is on this, and we won't beat it to death, is that we're talking about size up, and we're going to get into that for the next few weeks, few months, and we'll go piece by piece. But the takeaway is that just to get started is just start doing size ups when you come in, even on your way in. Look at the weather. If it's windy out, if it's snowy, if it's 90 degree, whatever it is, the weather, and the wind is a big thing. We'll do a whole episode on the wind, and just start your tour when you're leaving your house, and start thinking about your district and what may come. Because you know what? Eventually, it's not a matter of if, it's usually when. It's just a matter of time, and it's whether you're working or not.
Yes. So I just like to say to the audience is hopefully once a week we'll touch upon a subject and we will give you our experience and our thoughts, and then you can take back to your own self and either fit into your department or modify or add to your knowledge when dealing on the fire ground. And with that, I would say see you next week.
See you next week, Eric. All right. We'll be safe out there. And again, we'll see you on I used to say see you on the radio, but now we'll see you on the YouTube.
Yeah. Okay, Dan, till next week.
Ciao.